My name is Amber Wilson, 32 years old, and I never thought I'd be the type of daughter who'd cut her own mother off. But standing there in Mom's attorney's office, staring at the will that left everything, every single thing to my younger brother Jason, something inside me finally broke. 15 years of supporting her financially while she spoiled him rotten, and this was my thanks. Before I continue this story that changed everything about my family, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe if you want more real-life stories like mine. I grew up in a modest suburban home in Pennsylvania with my parents and younger brother Jason. Our childhood wasn't extraordinary, but it was stable until I turned 17. That year, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. Within 8 months, he was gone, leaving behind a devastated family. Jason was only 12 at the time. My mother, Margaret, never fully recovered from losing Dad. They'd been high school sweethearts, married for 25 years, and suddenly she was alone with 2 children to raise. The grief consumed her in ways I didn't fully understand until I was much older. As the older sibling, I stepped into a caretaker role almost immediately. Dad had always handled the finances, home repairs, and major decisions. Mom was overwhelmed, so I started taking on responsibilities far beyond what most teenagers deal with. Amber has always been my rock. Mom would tell family friends, her voice tinged with pride, so mature for her age. But looking back, I realized those compliments masked an unfair burden placed on my young shoulders. While I was figuring out how to pay bills and console my grieving mother, Jason was given space to process his grief however he needed. Mom would say, "He's just a boy, he needs time." This became the first thread in a pattern that would define our family for years to come. Before Dad died, Mom and I had a typical mother-daughter relationship. We had our disagreements, but there was love and mutual respect. After his death, our dynamic shifted dramatically. I became less of a daughter and more of a co-parent, financial advisor, and emotional support system. I was an excellent student despite everything happening at home. When college acceptance letters arrived, I had options to attend schools across the country. My high school counselor pulled me aside one day after class. "Amber, these are incredible opportunities," she said, pointing to acceptance packages from universities in California and New York. "You should be proud." But I already knew I wouldn't be going far. I enrolled at the state university, 20 minutes from our house, allowing me to live at home and continue supporting Mom. My choice was met with mixed reactions. "That's so thoughtful," Mom said, though she never once suggested I should consider other options. At 18, I started working part-time at a local marketing firm while taking a full course load. My first paycheck wasn't spent on typical college experiences. Instead, it went toward our electric bill that was teetering on disconnection. Throughout those years, I desperately sought Mom's approval. A perfect GPA, promotions at work, taking on household responsibilities, none of it seemed to earn the kind of warm acknowledgement I craved. Her approval was reserved primarily for one person, Jason. My brother was everything I wasn't: athletic, outgoing, and charismatic. He excelled in baseball and was popular in school. While I was quiet and studious, Jason commanded attention in any room. Mom absolutely adored him. "He's just like your father," she would say, her eyes lighting up as she watched him from the bleachers at his games. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Jason received a car for his 16th birthday, a used Toyota, but still a car. When I turned 16, I got a watch. Mom explained that girls don't need cars as much as boys do. I didn't argue because we couldn't afford 2 vehicles anyway. As Jason entered his late teens, a troubling pattern emerged. He would become intensely passionate about something: starting a DJ business, joining a startup with friends, investing in cryptocurrency, only to abandon it when difficulties arose. Each failed endeavor came with financial consequences that somehow became Mom's responsibility. His first business venture was a lawn care service that lasted exactly 3 weeks before he decided the summer heat was too much. Mom had already purchased a professional-grade mower and equipment using money from Dad's life insurance policy. He's finding himself, she would defend when I questioned these decisions. Your brother is an entrepreneur at heart. By the time Jason turned 20, he had totaled 2 cars, maxed out a credit card Mom had co-signed for, and dropped out of community college. Each time, Mom forgave him instantly and found ways to fix his problems. Meanwhile, I was building my career from the ground up. After graduating with honors, I converted my part-time marketing job into a full-time position. I worked relentlessly, earning promotion after promotion. By 28, I was the marketing director for a regional firm, earning a salary that would have made Dad proud. My professional success came at a personal cost. Dating was challenging when potential partners realized the extent of my family obligations. Several relationships ended when boyfriends couldn't understand why so much of my income went to supporting my mother. "You're being taken advantage of," my ex-boyfriend Mark said during our breakup conversation. "It's like you're married to your family's problems." I dismissed his concerns as insensitivity until I met Thomas. Unlike others, he didn't immediately suggest I cut ties with my family. Instead, he asked questions that made me reflect. "Do you think your mother would make the same sacrifices for you that you make for her?" he asked one evening as I was writing yet another check to cover Mom's property taxes. I couldn't answer him. Thomas became my anchor as family dynamics grew increasingly complex. He was the first person who loved me unconditionally without wanting to change me, but also gently challenged my perspective when needed. "Your kindness is beautiful," he told me, "but it shouldn't come at the expense of your well-being." His words planted seeds that would eventually bloom into the strength I needed to make the most difficult decision of my life. As years passed, my financial support for Mom increased steadily. What started as helping with occasional bills evolved into sending regular monthly payments. By my 30th birthday, I was covering her mortgage, utilities, car payment, and most of her daily expenses. "It's just until I get back on my feet," Mom would say, though she'd been saying this for almost 13 years with no change in sight. The expenses grew more extravagant over time. Home repairs were one thing, a leaking roof needed fixing, and the 20-year-old furnace eventually gave out. But then came Mom's requests for funds to renovate the kitchen because the countertops are so outdated, or to replace perfectly functional furniture. Most troubling were the vacations. Twice a year, Mom and Jason would take trips together to Florida beaches, Las Vegas, even a Caribbean cruise. These excursions were always presented to me after they were already booked. "We found such a deal, Amber. I've already put the deposit down with my credit card. Could you help cover it? Jason really needs this break after everything he's been through lately." And the everything Jason had been through typically referred to another failed job or relationship, consequences of his own choices that somehow became emergencies requiring family support and beach therapy. I never joined them on these trips. There was always some reason why it was just the two of them. The booking couldn't be changed. There were only 2 tickets available on sale, or, most honestly, we already have our traditions for these trips. As my resentment simmered beneath the surface, Mom's health began to decline. At 58, she was diagnosed with early-onset arthritis, high blood pressure, and prediabetes. These conditions weren't immediately life-threatening, but required proper management and lifestyle changes. I threw myself into researching her conditions, scheduling appointments with specialists, and driving her to doctors all over the city. I installed grab bars in her bathroom, purchased a medical alert system, and researched meal delivery services that catered to her dietary needs. "You're so good with all this medical stuff," Mom would say, patting my hand dismissively while scrolling through her phone. "I just can't keep track of it all." What she wasn't saying was that she didn't need to keep track because I was doing it for her. Meanwhile, Jason, who lived 20 minutes away, rarely helped with any of her medical care. Speaking of Jason, his financial irresponsibility reached new heights when he moved back home at 25 after his third failed business venture. This time, an online sports memorabilia shop that collapsed when he spent more on inventory than he could sell. "It's temporary," Mom assured me over the phone. "He just needs some time to regroup." But weeks turned into months, and soon Jason had established himself permanently in our childhood home. Worse, I discovered he was taking money from Mom despite knowing I was already supporting her financially. He needed new golf clubs for networking, Mom explained when I confronted her about a $2,000 charge on her credit card statement. Appearances matter in business. The business in question was entirely theoretical at this point. Jason spent most days playing video games and most evenings at local bars. Yet Mom continued to fund his expensive hobbies using her dwindling retirement savings, the same savings I was trying desperately to protect by sending her monthly support. What hurt most was discovering the emotional manipulation happening behind the scenes. During a rare dinner with just Mom and me, she slipped and referenced something I'd never told her, my consideration of a job offer in Chicago. "Jason thinks you're abandoning the family by even thinking about moving," she said casually between bites. I was stunned. I had only discussed the potential move with Thomas, who had been supportive but cautious about how it might affect my relationship with Mom. The realization that Jason and Mom were discussing me forming united opinions about my life choices without my input felt like a betrayal. Thomas became increasingly concerned about the toll this dynamic was taking on me. He watched as my stress manifested physically, tension headaches, disrupted sleep, and a persistent knot in my shoulders that no amount of massage could release. "I think you should consider talking to someone," he suggested gently one evening after I'd spent hours on the phone dealing with another of Mom's financial crises. "This isn't sustainable, Amber." Initially resistant, I eventually agreed to see a therapist. Dr. Bennett was calm and insightful, helping me untangle the complex web of guilt, obligation, and hope that kept me bound to unhealthy patterns. "What would happen if you set boundaries around your financial support?" she asked during our third session. The question terrified me. I'd built my identity around being the responsible one, the provider, the good daughter. Who would I be if I stepped back from that role? Thomas reinforced this questioning in his own way, pointing out the stark disparity in how Mom treated her two children. "When was the last time your mother asked about your dreams or supported one of your goals?" he asked one night. I couldn't remember. "Now think about how many times in the past month she's called you about supporting Jason's latest idea." The answer was at least weekly. These conversations planted seeds of change, but I wasn't ready to uproot 15 years of established dynamics. I still believed that with enough love, patience, and support, my mother would eventually see my worth and our relationship would transform. Then came the call that would change everything. The unexpected call from Mom's attorney came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was preparing for a client presentation. The number wasn't familiar, but something told me to answer rather than let it go to voicemail. "Ms. Wilson, this is Robert Caldwell from Caldwell Legal Services. I'm your mother's attorney. She's asked me to contact you regarding some family financial planning matters." My initial reaction was relief. Finally, after years of encouraging Mom to get her affairs in order, she was taking responsibility. Perhaps she was creating a proper will, organizing her finances, or even setting up a power of attorney for healthcare decisions. "We'd like to schedule a meeting this week if possible," Mr. Caldwell continued. "Would Thursday at 2 work for you? I rearranged my schedule, canceling a lunch meeting with an important client to accommodate the appointment." Thomas offered to come with me, but I declined, wanting to show Mom I could handle these adult matters independently. "This is a good sign," I told Thomas that evening. "Maybe she's finally taking control of her situation." When Thursday arrived, I dressed professionally in a navy suit and arrived 10 minutes early at the small law office downtown. The receptionist ushered me into a conference room where Mr. Caldwell was already seated with a folder of documents. "Your mother will be joining us shortly," he explained, checking his watch. She wanted me to begin reviewing these documents with you before she arrives. Mom was notoriously late to everything, so this didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was the document the attorney slid across the table. "This is your mother's last will and testament, which she executed last month," he explained. "She wanted you to be aware of her decisions." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of foreboding as I began to read. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out with painful clarity. "I hereby leave all of my property, both real and personal, to my son Jason Andrew Wilson." And then, most devastating of all, "I specifically disinherit my daughter Amber Lynn Wilson." The words hit like physical blows. I read them again, convinced I'd misunderstood. But the language was unambiguous. Mom had deliberately chosen to leave me nothing, not a keepsake, not a dollar, not even a mention, except to explicitly exclude me. "Is this some kind of mistake?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Caldwell looked uncomfortable. "I assure you, Ms. Wilson, your mother was of sound mind when she signed these documents. She was quite clear about her intentions." Just then, the door opened and Mom walked in, followed closely by Jason. Their timing was too perfect to be coincidental. They'd clearly planned to arrive after I'd had a chance to read the will. "Oh, good, you're reviewing everything," Mom said casually, as if we were discussing dinner plans rather than her decision to erase me from her legacy. "Why?" The question escaped before I could compose myself. "After everything I've done, everything I've given up," Mom's expression hardened slightly. "Jason needs it more than you do, Amber. You're successful. You have your career and Thomas. Jason still needs support." The attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Perhaps I should give you all some privacy to discuss this." "No need," Mom replied. "Amber understands. Don't you, honey? It's just practical." I stared at her, searching for any sign of awareness about what this meant symbolically, not just financially. There was none. "We can discuss this more at home," she added with finality, gathering her purse as if the matter was settled. I drove straight to Mom's house after the meeting, my thoughts racing and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Jason had ridden with Mom, so they arrived just before me. By the time I walked in, they were already in the kitchen, Mom pouring coffee, as if this were any normal day. "I don't understand," I said, forgoing pleasantries. 15 years of supporting this family financially, emotionally, in every way possible, and this is what I get. Don't be dramatic." Mom sighed. "It's just money, and you don't need it." "It's not about needing the money," I tried to explain. "It's about what this represents. You've literally written me out of your life." Jason leaned against the counter arms, crossed a barely concealed smirk on his face. "We all know you only helped because you wanted to control everything, Amber. You've always been that way." His words stung because they were so profoundly unfair. I'd given up scholarships, relationships, opportunities, all to keep our family afloat after Dad died. "That's not true," I said, my voice breaking. "I did it because I love you both, and we needed to stick together after Dad died." Mom waved her hand dismissively. A good daughter wouldn't care about money. She'd just want to help her family without expecting anything in return. That sentence, that single callous sentence, crystallized everything wrong with our relationship. In Mom's eyes, my role was to give endlessly without acknowledgement, appreciation, or reciprocity. I wasn't a person with my own needs and dreams. I was a resource to be drained. Something inside me broke in that moment. Memories flashed through my mind in rapid succession, missing my college roommate experience to live at home, sending Mom money instead of taking a vacation with friends, working through weekends to afford both my rent and her mortgage, sitting alone in hospital waiting rooms while she had routine procedures, the constant anxiety about having enough to cover everyone's needs. And through all of it, Jason had been given endless chances, endless forgiveness, endless support, emotional and financial, while I'd received scraps of attention and gratitude. My chest tightened, and I found it difficult to breathe. My hands trembled, not from sadness, but from a dawning realization this relationship was toxic, and it always had been. Amber, are you even listening? Mom's irritated voice broke through my thoughts. I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time, seeing her not as the grieving widow who needed my protection, but as a woman who had made choices. Choices to favor one child while exploiting the other. I have to go, I said quietly, gathering my purse. That's right, run away instead of having an adult conversation, Jason called after me. I paused at the door, turned, and met his gaze steadily. You have no idea what being an adult actually means. Then I walked out, not yet knowing this would be the last time I'd set foot in that house for many months to come. That night was one of the longest of my life. I tossed and turned, replaying the events of the day, questioning every assumption I'd ever made about my family. Thomas found me at 3 a.m, sitting at our kitchen table, surrounded by old family photos. I didn't want to wake you, I explained as he sat beside me. Talk to me, he said simply. And so I did. I poured out everything, the will, the confrontation, and most importantly, the realization that I'd been enabling a dysfunctional system for years. I feel so stupid, I confessed. Everyone could see it but me. You tried to tell me. Thomas took my hand. You weren't ready to hear it until now. That doesn't make you stupid, it makes you human. And we talked until sunrise about what healthy boundaries might look like, whether complete separation was necessary, or if a restructured relationship was possible. Thomas was supportive but firm in his belief that something needed to change. This isn't just about money, Amber. It's about your worth as a person. You deserve to be valued, not used. Later that morning, I called Dr. Bennett and scheduled an emergency session. She helped me process my feelings and strategize next steps. What are you hoping to achieve by setting boundaries? She asked. I thought carefully before answering. I want to stop enabling behaviors that hurt everyone involved, including Mom and Jason, and I want to reclaim my life. Those are healthy goals, she affirmed. The key will be communicating clearly without letting guilt drive your decisions. I spent the next 3 days researching the financial and emotional implications of cutting ties. I reviewed all the automatic payments I had set up for Mom's accounts, documented every loan and gift I'd provided over the years, and calculated what portion of my income had been diverted to family support. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 15 years, I had given my mother well over $200,000 money that could have gone toward my own retirement, a house instead of my condo, or experiences I'd denied myself. Once I felt prepared, I texted Mom and Jason requesting a meeting at a neutral location, a private room I reserved at a local restaurant. The formality of the request was intentional. This wouldn't be a casual family dinner where my concerns could be dismissed or redirected. They arrived looking annoyed, as if my request for a meeting was an imposition. I have plans later, so let's make this quick, Jason said as we sat down. I took a deep breath and spoke the words I'd practiced with both Thomas and Dr. Bennett. I've made a decision about our family's financial arrangements. I began, keeping my voice steady. After careful consideration, I will no longer be providing financial support to either of you. The silence that followed was profound. Mom's mouth literally fell open in shock. What do you mean? She finally sputtered. Exactly what I said. The monthly transfers will stop. I won't be paying your mortgage, utilities, or any other expenses going forward. Jason laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. This is about the will, isn't it? You're throwing a tantrum like a child. This is about 15 years of one-sided giving, I corrected him. The will simply made it clear where I stand in this family. I've been treated like an ATM, not a daughter. Mom's shock quickly transformed into anger. After everything I've done for you, I raised you, sacrificed for you. And I've spent my entire adult life repaying those sacrifices many times over. I interrupted. I've given up opportunities, relationships, and financial security to support this family since Dad died. That ends today. I outlined the practical implications the automatic transfers would stop immediately. I'd already removed myself as an authorized user on her credit cards. Any joint accounts would be closed. You'll have 30 days to make alternative arrangements for your bills. I explained, having calculated this time frame based on her current resources. I'm telling you now so you have time to adjust your finances accordingly. You can't just abandon your family, Mom cried loud enough that I was grateful for the private room. What kind of daughter does this? The kind who finally realizes her worth. I replied, surprised by my own calmness. I'm not abandoning you. I'm simply stopping financial support. We can still have a relationship if you want one, but it needs to be based on mutual respect, not my checkbook. Jason's face had grown increasingly red during the conversation. You've always been jealous of me, he accused. Just because Mom loves me more. This isn't about who Mom loves more. I said, though his words cut deep. This is about creating healthy boundaries that should have existed long ago. Mom escalated to threats. If you do this, you're no daughter of mine. I'll completely disown you. The irony wasn't lost on me. According to your will, you already have. I stood to leave, placing a folder on the table. This contains documentation of every payment I've made on your behalf over the past 5 years. I'm not expecting repayment. I just want you to understand the extent of what I've contributed. Neither of them reached for the folder. I hope we can build a healthier relationship moving forward, I added, meaning it despite everything. But that's up to you. As I walked away from that table, a weight I'd carried for 15 years began to lift. For the first time since Dad died, I felt like I could fully breathe. The aftermath was immediate and intense. Within hours of leaving the restaurant, my phone exploded with calls and texts from both Mom and Jason. The messages ranged from guilt-tripping, "How could you do this to your own mother?" to outright manipulation. "Mom is crying so hard she can barely breathe. Hope you're happy." After 2 days of this bombardment, I made the difficult decision to block their numbers. It wasn't a permanent solution, but I needed space to strengthen my resolve without constant emotional assault. The flying monkeys came next, family, friends, and distant relatives, suddenly concerned about my relationship with my mother. "Your mom is devastated," my Aunt Susan called to tell me. "She doesn't understand why you're punishing her like this." I explained my side as calmly as I could, but quickly realized most of these people had already decided I was the villain in the story. Rather than defend myself repeatedly, I began declining calls from numbers I didn't recognize. What surprised me most were the physical changes I experienced after cutting ties. Years of tension had manifested in chronic headaches, disrupted sleep, and persistent anxiety. Within weeks of establishing boundaries, these symptoms began to subside. "You look different," Thomas observed one morning. "More relaxed." I felt different, too lighter somehow, as if I'd put down a burden I hadn't fully acknowledged I was carrying. Friends who had seen me struggle for years with family obligations were largely supportive. My closest friend, Megan, took me out for dinner to celebrate what she called my Independence Day. "I've watched you sacrifice for them for years," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "I'm proud of you for finally putting yourself first." Not everyone was as understanding. Some friends with more traditional views of family obligations suggested I was being harsh or unfilial. "She's still your mother," my colleague Patrick said when I explained why I couldn't contribute to his Mother's Day gift collection. "You only get one." These comments stung, but sessions with Dr. Bennett helped me develop responses that were firm but not defensive. "I'm making choices that are healthy for everyone involved, even if it doesn't seem that way right now," became my standard reply. Throughout this tumultuous period, Thomas remained my rock. He never said, "I told you so," though he'd been gently pointing out the dysfunction for years. Instead, he celebrated each small victory in my journey toward healthier boundaries. "I'm falling in love with you all over again," he told me one evening. "I'm seeing parts of you that have been buried under family stress for so long." Those words meant more than he could know. The first indication of Mom's financial reality hit came in the form of a panicked voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it thinking it was another flying monkey, but decided to listen just in case. "Amber, they're saying they'll shut off the electricity next week if the bill isn't paid." Mom's voice was tight with anxiety. "I know you're upset about the will, but this is serious." I didn't call back, though the message triggered a wave of guilt that took hours to process. Dr. Bennett had prepared me for exactly this type of situation. "There will be moments designed to pull you back into old patterns," she'd warned. "Remember, you're not responsible for solving problems they're capable of handling themselves." Over the following weeks, evidence of their financial struggles trickled in through various channels. A mutual friend mentioned in passing that Mom was trying to sell some jewelry. My cousin posted on social media about helping Mom list some furniture online. These weren't emergencies. They were adjustments to a new financial reality, one where Mom and Jason would need to support themselves. What surprised me was Jason's inability to step up. Despite his promises to take care of everything, he seemed incapable of maintaining steady employment or contributing meaningfully to household expenses. He quit the warehouse job after 3 days, Megan reported after running into Mom at the grocery store. Said it was beneath his skills. Meanwhile, Mom's retirement savings, which should have been substantial after a lifetime of work, plus Dad's life insurance, were rapidly depleting. I learned through family channels that she'd taken a significant early withdrawal, incurring tax penalties in the process. These developments were difficult to hear, but I reminded myself daily, their financial choices were not my emergency. Both were adults with options they simply hadn't needed to exercise while I was funding their lifestyle. As the reality of their situation set in, the attempts to regain control escalated dramatically. Mom began calling from unknown numbers several times a day. When I blocked those too, she enlisted increasingly distant connections to reach me. "Your third-grade teacher's daughter ran into your mom at church," came one particularly absurd message. "She's really struggling and needs to talk to you." Jason took a more direct approach, showing up unannounced at my workplace one afternoon. Security escorted him out when he became belligerent, but not before he created a scene in the lobby. "Your brother says you're abandoning your sick mother," my supervisor mentioned carefully the next day. "Is everything okay? Do you need some personal time?" I was mortified, but used the opportunity to briefly explain the situation. To my relief, she was understanding and arranged for security to be on alert for future incidents. Perhaps most disturbing was discovering that Mom had been spreading an alternative narrative about our estrangement to extended family. According to the story reaching my relatives, I had stolen money from her over the years and was now punishing her for questioning my actions. "Did you really make her remortgage the house and keep the money?" my cousin Tyler asked during an awkward phone call. The accusation was so absurd it would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. I had helped Mom refinance years ago to lower her interest rate, and every penny had gone toward her expenses. The legal threats began shortly after the 1-month mark. A strongly worded but ultimately meaningless letter arrived from a different attorney than the one who had handled the will. "Our client, Margaret Wilson, asserts that you have a duty of care as her daughter and may be legally liable for elder abandonment," the letter stated. I forwarded it to a lawyer friend who confirmed what I suspected: no such legal obligation existed. Adult children are not legally required to financially support their parents in our state, regardless of family expectations. "This is intimidation, not legitimate legal action," my friend assured me. "You can safely ignore it." Exactly 1 month after our meeting at the restaurant, the call came. It was 7:30 on a Tuesday evening, and the number was unfamiliar. Something told me to answer it. "Hello." Where's my money? Mom's voice came through immediately sharp and demanding. No greeting, no pleasantries, just an entitled question that confirmed everything I'd come to understand about our relationship. Mom, I said, keeping my voice level. I made it clear that I wouldn't be providing financial support anymore. This is ridiculous, Amber. My mortgage is due and the bank doesn't care about our little disagreement. It's not a disagreement, Mom. It's a boundary. You and Jason need to figure out your finances without my help. She scoffed. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me by leaving me homeless. You're not homeless, I pointed out. You have options. You could downsize to a smaller place. Jason could get a steady job and contribute. You could sell some assets. Those are my retirement assets. I shouldn't have to touch those because my daughter is being spiteful. The conversation continued in this vein for several minutes. Mom cycling through guilt, anger, and even occasional moments of pleading. I maintained the boundary firmly, but without cruelty. I love you, Mom, I said toward the end of the call, and I'm open to rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms, but I won't be resuming financial support. She hung up without saying goodbye. The family rift widened in the aftermath of this conversation. Extended family members who had initially stayed neutral began taking sides. To my surprise, not all sided with Mom. My father's sister, Aunt Karen, called me out of the blue one evening. I've been hearing Margaret's version of events for weeks, she said. I'd like to hear yours if you're willing to share it. I gave her a condensed but honest account of the situation, including the discovery of the will and the years of financial support I'd provided. That sounds like Margaret, Aunt Karen sighed. Your father would be heartbroken to see what's happened to this family. Her support meant more than I could express. As Dad's only sibling, she was my strongest remaining connection to him. Your father was so proud of you, she told me. He always said you had his work ethic and your own brilliant mind. He'd want you to live your life, Amber, not sacrifice it for people who don't appreciate the sacrifice. Other relatives were less understanding. Mom's side of the family largely closed ranks around her, accepting her narrative without question. Several cousins I'd been close to growing up stopped responding to my messages entirely. The family had effectively split in two, with battle lines drawn around a conflict that at its core was simply about one adult setting a reasonable boundary with other adults. Through it all, I held firm to my decision, reminding myself daily that temporary discomfort was the price of long-term health for all of us. As the weeks of separation stretched into months, I found myself with something I hadn't experienced since my father died, space and energy, to focus on my own life and growth. Without the constant drain of family drama and financial support, I channeled my energy into my career. I took on challenging projects I'd previously avoided due to time constraints, contributed ideas in meetings rather than sitting quietly, and made myself visible to senior leadership in ways that had felt impossible before. The results came faster than I expected. 3 months after cutting ties with Mom and Jason, I was offered a major promotion to Senior Marketing Director overseeing our agency's largest accounts. Your work has always been excellent, my director explained during the offer meeting, but recently you've shown leadership qualities we hadn't seen before. You're more present, more confident. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase money that for the first time in my adult life I could decide how to use without family obligations dictating my choices. Thomas celebrated my success with champagne and a weekend getaway to a lakeside cabin, our first real vacation in years. This is just the beginning, he said as we watched the sunset from the dock. You're finally getting the recognition you deserve. Professional advancement wasn't the only area of growth. With Dr. Bennett's guidance, I began dismantling the psychological patterns established over 15 years of family dysfunction. Notice how quickly you move to guilt when setting any boundary, she pointed out during one particularly insightful session. That's a conditioned response, not a reflection of reality. I learned to identify these patterns, the immediate assumption that others' problems were my responsibility, the belief that saying no made me selfish, the habit of putting my needs last in every situation. Recognizing these patterns was the first step toward changing them. Building a chosen family of supportive friends became another focus. For years, I'd neglected friendships due to family obligations. Now I made conscious efforts to nurture these connections, accepting invitations I would have declined before, hosting dinner parties at my condo, and being more vulnerable about my struggles. "We've been waiting for you to have time for us," my friend Layla joked during a girls' night out. "Welcome back to the land of the living." Thomas and I also found our relationship evolving in beautiful ways. Without the constant stress of family drama, we connected more deeply and began seriously discussing our future. "I want to build a life with you," he told me one evening as we walked along the riverfront, "a life where we both thrive." News about Jason and Mom came sporadically through the family grapevine. From what I gathered, Jason's situation was deteriorating rapidly. Without my financial safety net, the consequences of his choices were finally catching up with him. He'd cycled through 3 more jobs in as many months, never lasting more than a few weeks before quitting or being fired. His car had been repossessed after missed payments, and there were rumors of gambling debts. Most concerning were the whispers about substance abuse. A cousin mentioned seeing Jason completely wasted at a local bar on a Tuesday afternoon, and Mom had apparently confided in Aunt Susan that she was finding empty liquor bottles hidden around the house. I felt genuine concern for my brother, but also recognized that his current struggles were the natural consequences of years of enabled behavior. As Dr. Bennett reminded me, sometimes people need to hit bottom before they're motivated to change. Mom's situation was more complicated. Her health issues, which had been manageable with proper care, were apparently worsening under financial stress. She'd canceled some specialist appointments because of co-payments she couldn't afford, and had switched to cheaper, less effective medications for her arthritis. These reports triggered waves of guilt that I worked through in therapy. "You can feel compassion without taking responsibility," Dr. Bennett reminded me. "Your mother has options she's choosing not to exercise." Those options included selling the 4-bedroom house that was far too large for one or even two people, accessing more of her retirement funds, or finding part-time work that accommodated her health limitations. Instead, she seemed determined to maintain the status quo while blaming me for its unsustainability. 4 months into our estrangement, I received an unexpected call from Mill Creek Medical Center. Mom had been admitted after fainting at the grocery store, and I was still listed as her emergency contact. Her blood pressure was dangerously high, the nurse explained. "She's stable now, but the doctor wants to keep her overnight for observation." This was exactly the type of situation I had dreaded, a genuine health crisis that tested my boundaries. After consulting briefly with Thomas and then calling Dr. Bennett for guidance, I made my decision. I sent a large bouquet of flowers to her hospital room with a simple note: "Wishing you a speedy recovery. Let me know if you'd like to talk when you're feeling better." I didn't visit in person, knowing that a hospital room was not the place for the complex conversations we needed to have. It was a middle path, acknowledging her situation with compassion while maintaining the boundaries I'd established. Through hospital staff, I learned that Mom had been hiding more serious health issues than I'd been aware of. Her prediabetes had progressed to full type 2 diabetes, and she'd stopped taking her blood pressure medication regularly, apparently due to cost concerns. This information was painful to hear, but reinforced my understanding of our dynamic. Mom had chosen to risk her health rather than adjust her lifestyle or ask Jason to contribute financially, all while blaming me for consequences of her own decisions. As I processed these developments, I remained committed to my own growth and the healthy life I was building. For perhaps the first time, I fully understood that loving someone doesn't always mean saving them. Sometimes it means letting them find their own way, even when that path is difficult. 6 months after I cut financial ties with my family, an unexpected letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from Mom, handwritten on the stationery she'd always reserved for important correspondence. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, unsure what to expect. Amber. The letter began without the usual "dear" prefix. These past months have given me time to think about our family. While I still believe you acted hastily, I've had to acknowledge that perhaps things between us weren't as balanced as they should have been. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing to self-reflection I'd ever received from her. The letter continued with updates about her health improving, the house she was considering selling, and Jason still struggling, but supposedly looking into treatment programs. "Family should be about more than money," she wrote toward the end. "If you're willing, I'd like to try to rebuild some kind of relationship." I read the letter multiple times, trying to discern its true intent. Was this genuine introspection, or simply another attempt to reestablish financial support? After discussing it with Thomas and Dr. Bennett, I decided to respond cautiously but optimistically. My reply was kind but firm, setting clear conditions for moving forward. Any relationship would need to be based on mutual respect. Financial support was permanently off the table, and we would need professional help to navigate the rebuilding process. To my surprise, Mom agreed to family mediation. We scheduled our first session with a mediator who specialized in family estrangement. Jason initially refused to participate, but eventually joined under pressure from Mom, who had finally begun to recognize the role her enabling had played in his struggles. The first mediation session was tense and uncomfortable. We sat in a quiet office with Dr. Levine, the mediator, who established ground rules for communication. "We're here to listen and understand each other," she emphasized, "not to assign blame or revisit every past hurt." Despite these guidelines, old patterns emerged quickly. Mom became defensive when I described feeling used for financial support, and Jason interrupted repeatedly to portray himself as a victim of circumstances rather than his own choices. "You've always had everything handed to you," he accused me. "Some of us have had to struggle." I might have once reacted with anger to such a blatant mischaracterization, but months of therapy had given me new tools. "That hasn't been my experience," I replied calmly. "I'd like to understand why you see things so differently." Dr. Levine skillfully guided the conversation back to productive ground whenever it veered toward recrimination. By the end of that first difficult session, we had at least established a shared vocabulary for discussing our family dynamics. It took 3 more sessions before the breakthrough came. We were discussing the aftermath of Dad's death when Mom suddenly stopped mid-sentence, her eyes filling with tears. "I couldn't cope," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was drowning, and Amber was so capable. She stepped up without being asked, and it was easier to let her handle everything than to face how broken I felt." She turned to me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. "I took advantage of your strength, and then I resented you for having it. That wasn't fair." The acknowledgement unlocked something in all of us. Jason reluctantly admitted that he'd been jealous of my success and had enjoyed seeing Mom favor him. "It was the one area where I felt like I was winning," he confessed. For my part, I acknowledged that I'd enabled the dynamic by never setting boundaries earlier and by deriving some sense of moral superiority from being the responsible one. These admissions didn't immediately heal our relationships, but they created space for something new to grow. Over the following months, we continued with mediation while establishing a cautious new connection. Mom eventually did sell the house, moving into a comfortable 2-bedroom condo that better suited her needs and finances. Jason, after hitting a particularly low point that included a DUI arrest, finally entered a treatment program for alcohol dependency and underlying depression. Meanwhile, my own life continued to flourish. The promotion I'd received led to even greater opportunities at work, and my confidence grew as I proved myself in challenging leadership situations. Thomas and I became engaged during a weekend trip to the mountains, planning a small, meaningful ceremony that reflected our values. Most significantly, I found myself building a life based on healthy relationships rather than obligation. Friends who celebrated my successes without envy, colleagues who respected boundaries around work and personal time, a partner who loved me for who I was, not what I could provide. These connections formed the foundation of my new understanding of family. When Mom asked if I would help Jason research treatment options, I agreed, offering information and emotional support while maintaining firm financial boundaries. When she invited Thomas and me to dinner at her new place, we accepted, bringing wine and conversation rather than checkbooks and guilt. 6 months into this tentative reconciliation, Mom asked to meet with her attorney again, this time with both Jason and me present. "I want to revise my will," she explained. "I know you don't care about the money, Amber, but symbolism matters in families." And the new will divided her assets equally between Jason and me, with provisions for any funds designated for Jason to be managed by a trustee until he demonstrated 5 years of sobriety and financial stability. I appreciated the gesture, but was surprised to discover how little it mattered to me now. The inheritance had never been about money. It had been about recognition and value in the family. Now that I'd found my worth independent of Mom's validation, the will was simply a piece of paper. Jason's journey proved more challenging than Mom's. His recovery involved setbacks and relapses, but I found I could support him emotionally while still maintaining my boundaries. We began having monthly lunch meetings where we slowly rebuilt a sibling relationship that had been poisoned by competition and resentment. "I never really knew you," he admitted during one of these lunches. "I was so busy being jealous that I never saw how much pressure you were under." And family counseling continued alongside these individual connections, helping us develop healthier communication patterns and expectations. It wasn't always smooth. Old habits resurfaced during stress or conflict, but we now had tools to recognize and redirect these patterns. Through this healing process, I came to understand profound truths that had eluded me for years. Real love isn't transactional. It doesn't keep score or demand payment. It respects boundaries and celebrates independence. Healthy love requires boundaries. Without them, relationships become distorted and ultimately harmful to everyone involved. Sometimes distance brings clarity. The painful separation had been necessary for all of us to see the dysfunction that had become our normal. Self-respect must come before family obligation. By valuing myself enough to set boundaries, I had actually created the possibility of authentic relationships rather than codependent ones. And perhaps most importantly, I never needed my mother's money. I just needed to know I mattered to her as a person, not as a resource. As I reflect on this journey, I realize that cutting ties wasn't the end of our family. It was the beginning of something healthier. The old patterns had to break completely before we could build something new in their place. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? What helped you maintain those boundaries when guilt and obligation pulled at you? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complex family dynamics. Remember that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most profound healing. Thank you for listening to my story.